Hello, in this video I'm going to carry on from where I left off, talking about how Jessi was abused by her aunt Jodi Hilderbrandt. Jessi describes herself as non-binary and likes to be referred to as they, so I'm going to refer to them as they throughout this video. They are 30 years old now, and all of this happened when they were a teenager, I think 15 or 16 years old.
So the things that I experienced while living with Jodi, I experienced being tied, I experienced being duct taped, I experienced being blindfolded, I experienced severe isolation, I experienced severe emotional, spiritual, and psychological abuse.
They were in captivity. I mean, I don't even know if it needs quotes, for over a year. So what happened was they already didn't have really any kind of relationship with their dad anyway, because they said in the interview that they could count on one hand the number of times he spoke directly to them. And that's pretty strange considering he was living in the same house. He did have a relationship with their siblings, so their brother went on to work with him. So that would have really made them feel like the odd one out. Their mother couldn't tolerate any kind of conflict. So if they were having an argument with her, she would disappear up to her bedroom, lock the door, and just not be seen for hours. Then she would reappear and act as if nothing had happened and not talk about it. So I would expect that that would have sent the message that it wasn't okay to speak your mind. It wasn't okay to talk about feelings that weren't convenient feelings for her. That you have to agree with me, otherwise I'm not sticking around. Another message might have been, you're so difficult that I can't even be in the same room as you. You're hard work, there's something wrong with you. You're unpleasant, there's something bad about you that I don't want to be near because it's so negative. You're ruining the atmosphere. You're responsible for my feelings. I mean, the list is endless. And that just shows how much damage that behaviour alone can cause, just always leaving the room whenever your teenager wants to confront you about something. Even by the time someone is a teenager, they're not old enough yet to fully understand that their parents are not capable of certain things. They're still going to be turning things on themselves because that's what children do. They do that because, and this is unconscious, but they believe everything is their fault because that way they don't have to see their parents as dysfunctional. Their parents are the people who are in charge. So that it's important they feel safe with them. If their parents can't function properly in the world, then that's terrifying. So that's why children tend to believe that the parent treating them in any way badly is their fault. And unfortunately, there's a real power behind those internalized criticisms. They become very strong beliefs. They become our core beliefs that we then take through our lives, and they influence so many of our thoughts and feelings and behaviours. I'm going to be talking about the main takeaways I've got from watching that interview. One of the things Jessi said was the only things spoken about in her family by the parents, with the kids, were religion, sport, and politics. And Jessi wasn't interested in sport. They were an arty person. They've gone on to be a tattooist. They were into music and art. And so that wasn't of interest to the family. And so as a result, they really focused on understanding Mormonism. And they read a book at age 11, cover to cover, about Mormonism that most adult Mormons haven't read. So they became very educated about this just in order to try to get closer to their dad. But obviously it didn't really work. What I'm taking from that is that they must have always felt like there's something wrong with me, and that's why my dad doesn't talk to me. I mean, that's pretty much what any kid would be left feeling like. On top of that, Jessi is gay. So I don't know if they knew that at that time, because I know that they had had a couple of kisses with a couple of boys. But whether they knew that or whether they just had a sense that there was something different about them. Either way, I can imagine how they would have felt like an outsider because of that too. In the family, it was very, very much frowned upon for somebody to be gay. It just was not acceptable. So the time at which Jodi Hilderbrandt came in and destroyed Jessi's life, that is what it sounds like. They weren't in a great place already, but by the time Jodi had finished with them, they really were in pieces and tried to commit suicide 3 separate times. The point at which she takes over really and has Jessi live with her, that all began when Jessi was having an argument with her parents one night. They were staying with Jessi's grandparents. It was their wedding anniversary. Jessi comes across to me as somebody very wise, somebody older than her years, somebody who is kind and thoughtful and sweet and open-minded. And I'm saying that because you're going to hear about how they were made to feel about themselves, how they were told what a bad person they were. I do think they were very forgiving towards their mum, too much so. And so I think that means they haven't fully grasped really who their mum is and exactly how much she failed them and why, you know. But that can take a long time. I'm sure Jessi will sooner or later. It's painful to know about what they were told about themselves as a young teenager, just at that point in life where you really need a bit of a self-esteem boost, and already having come from a neglected childhood, already feeling like there's something different about me, there's something wrong with me. My dad treats me differently to my siblings. So they'd had an argument with their conflict-averse mother, and then they'd gone and locked themselves in the basement. The argument was about having to cook food that was, you know, that had meat in it when they were vegetarian, which meant that they couldn't eat the food they were making for the family. So this is at the grandparents' house, this is for the whole family. And they described themselves as having been a bratty teenager that day. I kind of think it's not really... I think it's kind of understandable that someone who's a vegetarian might not want to prepare meat. Anyway, while Jessi was in the basement, their parents were talking to Jodi Hilderbrandt. Jodi Hilderbrandt is the sister of Jessi's dad. And at that time, she had a great reputation as a therapist. She was a very successful therapist. Anyone would be referred to her within the church. And so the parents spoke to her about their difficulties with Jessi, and she believed she had the solution. She said, leave her here with me. You guys go. Don't say goodbye, just go. And so that's what they did. So at this point it was nighttime, and Jessi was woken up by Jodi and her grandparents. They knocked on the door, they came in, and they told her, your parents have gone, and from now on your life's going to change. That situation was shocking for Jessi. They would have, I imagine, felt abandoned, they would have felt rejected, they would have felt like they're such a bad person that their parents just can't deal with them anymore, and they're just handing over all responsibility to somebody else. So I can imagine that might have also felt like a betrayal. They might have felt like they didn't even have the right to hear from their parents that they were leaving, or why, or for how long, because they were that unlovable, you know, and that bad a person. From that point on, Jessi was going to be living with Jodi Hildebrand, and things escalated. So at the beginning, Jessi was allowed to speak to her parents on the phone. They weren't allowed to be left on their own. They always had to be around somebody. And that feels like there was a lot of distrust in their character. Their cousins would have to keep an eye on them. They were taken out of school. They had their hair cut. And Jessi says that anything of value was taken away from them, anything they valued. They were very good at school, so that gave them self-esteem, made them feel good about themselves, and so that was taken away. Their hair made them feel good about themselves. Hair is an important part of identity. So that was just stripped away, and they were homeschooled at first for 2 months. And then that was also taken away. It's not even legal that happened. I mean, there are lots of parts to this and the way that it escalated, and it's really disturbing. And I guess I'm just thinking that I should talk about other aspects in other videos so this doesn't just become one long spiel of just fact after fact after fact, because I want to examine each situation. But just being told other people need to be with you, as if you need to be watched at all times, that's already going to make the person feel like there's something seriously wrong with them, I would imagine. And isn't it interesting how they were doing really well at school? So what drastic thing actually happened that meant that the parents needed to get somebody else to look after Jessi? I mean, they weren't doing drugs, they weren't sleeping around, they hadn't even had sex yet, they weren't punching anyone in the face, or being violent, they weren't graffitiing anywhere, they were doing well at school. So, I mean, this is a great example of parents who are very black and white and all or nothing in terms of their thinking about their children's behaviour. So it seems like they saw the arguments with Jessi. I mean, that there were probably more than one. They saw those arguments as being a massive problem, as if there's a good child and a bad child, and ours is a bad child, and there's no in between. That this is a problem child. That's the other thing that it seems is kind of screaming out from this situation. Everyone knew they were a problem. And so that was a label that was put onto Jessi. There also seems to be a lot of fear around that. For Jessi's parents, for Ruby Franke and her husband, and for Jodi Hilderbrandt, it all seems to be about a need to excessively control, as if their children are walking on a very narrow tightrope, and any moment they can fall into hell. And so, huge measures need to be taken. Everything has to be the most extreme, because otherwise this kid is going to become a bad person. And that's something that abusers have in common, whether they're religious or not. And a lot of this, I mean, as you'll hear as I go on in other videos, a lot of this was about religion and the idea that Satan was speaking through her. That's what Jodi Hilderbrandt said was happening to Jessi. And so, but at the same time, although there may be people who were raised in a very religious atmosphere who may have been told similar things, I think there'll also be a lot of people out there who weren't, but they still were sent the same kinds of messages of a good girl, a good boy, you're good, you're bad, and that's it. And if the way you behave is very convenient for the parent, then you're good. And if you're a challenge, then you're bad. So it's really all about just what's easiest for the parent. And then they decide that's who you are as a person. And then they try to shame you for it. They try to be very harsh to make sure that you understand you're a bad person, so that you'll snap out of it and become a good person and somebody who's suddenly very convenient to be around, and they don't have to try as hard. And so it's all about what's happening for the parent, and none of this is ever about what the child is experiencing, so that the disruptive behavior becomes something the child is doing to the parent, and not about the child going through something, having feelings and thoughts that are upsetting them, and as a result acting on them. I think the last thing on any of these people's minds was the self-esteem of the child. Does Jessi feel okay about themselves? You know, that was completely irrelevant. And as we go through this, you know, as I talk about this in other videos, I think that's going to become more and more apparent. Keep in mind that this is not just these parents, that yes, this is an extreme example, but that this is what it may have happened to you, it may have happened to someone you know, but there is very much a theme that exists throughout this story and throughout many, many stories out there. It's often the really extreme examples that are more clear, and I find that they can help people to notice the same pattern, you know, just further down the spectrum in their own lives. So I hope that was helpful. I'm going to carry on in the next video looking at what happened to Jessi as things began to get worse, and you know, and what messages may have been sent to them about that. As things progress with the case with Jodi Hilderbrandt and with Ruby Franke, as any news comes out, I'll also discuss that. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.